United and let America vote. And it's such an honor to be here today with Jon Ossoff for U.S. Senate in Georgia. We're going to have a great conversation about money in politics, voting rights, how to clean up corruption in Washington. And thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. We hope you're well and safe. Before we get started, we just want to take a moment of silence to reflect the life, the legacy, and the leadership of Congressman John Lewis. So let's take that moment now. Okay, we're going to talk about Congressman Lewis's legacy, about voting rights, about how we can make sure that everyone has the ability and the right to cast their ballot safely and securely in November. But before we get started, I'm going to kick off with a few introductory remarks, kick it over to Jon for his introduction remarks, and then we're going to get right into questions and answers. So if you have a question, please comment with a question. We'd love to hear what you're thinking about, and we'll get to those questions in just a few minutes. So again, I'm Tiffany Muller, and I'm president of Citizens United and Let America Vote. And we are two organizations tackling two of the toughest issues facing our democracy today: big money in politics and voter suppression. You know, 10 years ago, the Supreme Court decided the Citizens United case, which we think is one of the most disastrous cases of our lifetime. And it took these two really terrible ideas and it merged them together. And it said money equals speech, and corporations are people, and it put a for sale sign on our democracy. And it opened the floodgates to unlimited and undisclosed corporate money flooding into our system. And what we've seen is that in the past 10 years, there's been $4.5 billion of spending from outside special interest groups to influence our federal elections. Right there in Georgia, it's $89 million just in the last 10 years. And you've had some of that directed at yourself already, Jon, so I know we'll talk about some of that. More importantly, we've seen how that large amount of money is breaking our politics on Capitol Hill, how the money in politics is directly related to the action or inaction of public policy, where politicians in Washington have rigged the system to help their big special interest donors, but all of you watching are the ones paying the price. And let's take one example. Let's take prescription drug prices. You know, Big Pharma has given over $57 million to outside special interest groups in the last 10 years. They've given $140 million to candidates directly, and they employ 1,500 lobbyists on any given day. That is 3 lobbyists per every member of Congress. And what we've seen is that the cost of prescription drugs continues to go up and go up and go up, and that too many Americans are having to choose between paying their bills or being able to afford medicine that they really need. And your opponent, Jon, Senator Perdue, has taken over $77,000 from the pharmaceutical industry and then voted for the 2017 tax break bill that gave Big Pharma $76 billion in tax breaks. This isn't how our system's supposed to work. While he's voting for tax cuts for Big Pharma, too many Americans aren't able to afford their prescription drugs. And that's why we know we need to send a different kind of leader to Washington. And that's why we're here today in support of Jon Ossoff. You know, in 2017, we were really proud to stand with Jon in the special election, and we're proud to be supporting him now in the race against Senator Perdue. Jon is rejecting contributions from corporate PACs and fighting to protect the right to vote. And he's really dedicated his entire career to cleaning up corruption, from exposing corruption in governments and industries around the world, now fighting to make corruption a cornerstone of his campaign, and calling out corruption as it exists right now in Washington. And let's contrast that to Senator Perdue. You know, he's taken $2.6 million from corporate PACs over the course of his career. $2.6 million. That's a lot of money. And he's rewarded them with things like special access and that corporate tax break we were just talking about. I know we get to talk more about this later, but for example, he set up a donor program that he calls the boardroom, where the folks who give him the most amount of money, individuals who contribute at least $5,600 or PACs that contribute $7,500, get access to quarterly meetings, an annual retreat at Sea Island, on Georgia Sea Island, and a yearly reception at his home. You know, that kind of money for access is exactly what's wrong with our system and exactly what Jon's going to Washington to clean up. You know, this is a tough race, though. There's no doubt about it. Georgia is a swing state, and this is going to be a really tough race, and we need all of your help all the way through the end. We just commissioned a poll, and it had Jon up by 1 point. So this is basically a tied-up race. I know it was just moved into the toss-up category by Cook Political Ratings. And so I'm excited to be here today to talk about all the ways that we can help win this campaign and give power back to the people next January. So, Jon, I'm going to kick it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Thanks for the introduction. Really appreciate your support. Appreciate you being here. You know, for those who are not familiar with End Citizens United and are just getting familiar at this town hall, End Citizens United is one of the most effective groups in history at highlighting the malign influence, especially of secret money and corporate money in politics. And you've also done an amazing job of uplifting and elevating small dollar grassroots donors as the antidote to this problem. Look, I mean, everyone kind of understands how this works. You know, as long as politicians like Senator Perdue raise such vast sums from corporate PACs, from lobbyists, as long as they are so blatant about, you know, he sells meetings for corporate PAC checks. Literally, he guarantees you 4 meetings a year if, you know, a corporate lobbyist can cut a $7,500 corporate PAC check. As long as that's how politics works, politicians like David Perdue are going to serve the narrow private interests that fund their political organizations, not the public. And you look at his voting record. I mean, you know, I run a business, as you know, Tiffany, that exposes corruption and organized crime and war crimes for international news organizations. And oftentimes our teams, our brave colleagues, reporters, have to go in undercover to document corruption. But the corruption in American politics today is hiding in plain sight. You just go look at how David Perdue funds his campaigns. Then you go look at his voting record and you see the whole story. Except we don't see the side of it that's in secret. And the Citizens United decision, which opened the floodgates to unlimited secret spending on politics, it's one of those things that really blows your mind, because who's for that? You know, if we went out and asked anybody on the street, hey, do you think that corporate America should be able to spend limitless amounts influencing elections in secret? No one's for it. It obviously makes no sense. It's obviously corruption. And that's why I think we can build a majority, a powerful majority, behind the platform of reforming this system, overturning that terrible decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we see is that actually 78% of Republicans want to overturn Citizens United.
Wow.
Democrats, independents, Republicans, nobody wants more money in politics. The only place this is a partisan issue is on Capitol Hill. And it's frankly because right now, one party has decided they'd rather stand with their big donors rather than standing with the people. And that's why we know it matters so much who we send to Washington and why we have to send you to Washington. So I'm going to put in our first ask now, then we're going to hop right into questions. But look, we need your help. Again, Senator Perdue is selling access to donors, taking $2.6 million from corporate PACs. Jon's running his campaign with individual grassroots donors, rejecting all contributions from corporate PACs. But that means that he needs your help. And so go to electjon.com and do what you can. $5, $10, $15. With all of us joining together, our voices are louder than the special interest, and we can propel to victory in November. And look, campaigning in a pandemic is hard. There is no doubt about it. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit during this too, Jon. But so he also needs your help to contact voters and to make sure that voters know who he is and what he's running for and what he believes in. So go to electjon.com to donate or to volunteer. And I know that the campaign would appreciate your help. Okay, so let's get right into some questions. That sound good?
Great, let's do it.
Let's do it. So right now we know that a lot of politicians are blocking access to expanding voting rights. And this has also become front and center because obviously we've seen what's happened in these primaries across the country with long lines and weeks and weeks and weeks before results are finalized. And obviously a lifelong mission of your friend and mentor, Congressman John Lewis, was to make sure that everyone had the right and the access to cast their ballot, that the vote was the single most powerful piece of our democracy. So what can we do to honor his life and legacy? What can we do to protect the vote in November?
Yeah, and it's fitting this week of all weeks to discuss it and to honor Congressman Lewis' struggle for voting rights. And I actually have behind me here, I wanted to share this with you, Tiffany. This is a cartoon by Mike Lukovich, who is the Atlanta-based political cartoonist, and it's called The Bridge. And this depicts Congressman Lewis bridging the gap with his body so that people can walk across to the polling place. And of course, that symbolizes his leadership of the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, 55 years ago with Hosea Williams and so many other civil rights activists, and how he put his body on the line and sacrificed his body and risked his life, had his skull fractured that day, marching for voting rights. And that's why it is so disgraceful that 55 years later, there are still politicians, especially in the South, but not just in the South, across the country, who want to abuse their official power to disenfranchise their own constituents. It's really appalling. And it's so blatant. I mean, here in Georgia, we've had senior GOP politicians talking about how much of a threat the growing diversity of the electorate is here, how they worry that expanding ballot access via mail voting could spell electoral defeat for them. There was an effort in Georgia's state legislature to forbid, check this out, Tiffany, an effort in the state legislature to forbid state or county election officials from proactively sending absentee ballot applications this year during a pandemic. It failed. And it failed because people blew up their phones. People called the state legislature at an incredible volume. They raised a hue and cry in letters to the editor and on social media. And citizens standing up and saying, we're not going to tolerate this, whether it's us or our fellow citizen, whether it's someone who supports our political party or not. We're not going to tolerate the abuse of power to disenfranchise people. And I think that the silver lining is that there's never been such broad recognition of this problem. And Stacey Abrams' incredible work building Fair Fight, based here in Georgia, to advocate for voting rights, your incredible work with Jason Kander at Let America Vote, which is not just, you are not just doing that work in advocacy and in the courts, but also getting out and knocking on doors, registering voters, making sure that people are empowered to vote, to understand what their rights are and how to defend them. So we need a call to action. And my call to action is to sign up to volunteer with the campaign, because what our volunteers are doing right now, even though in the interest of public health, we can't go out and knock on doors, is calling and texting voters so they can check their registration status. Because remember, there have been huge voter purges here in Georgia, and not all of those 700,000 people died or left the state. Many were improperly purged. So we're checking on people's voter registration status. We're making sure they understand the process for absentee and early voting, and we're building a relationship and a dialogue with them so we can follow up. And this is the amazing work that y'all do at Let America Vote as well. So we can follow up and say, hey, did the absentee ballot application come? Are you having any issues with election authorities? Do you know how to check on its status? And that's, yes, it's the campaign doing it, but it's volunteers with the campaign. So folks who are watching who want to be part of that effort of defending the franchise and expanding voting rights, go to electjon.com/volunteer, electjon.com/volunteer. And when I represent this state in the Senate, I will champion a new Voting Rights Act in John Lewis' honor to fully restore the Voting Rights Act that's already on the books and to strengthen it and to make voter suppression a federal crime.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's going on right now is that these next 2 weeks are really critical in the fight to get election funding that's needed for states to be able to have time to prepare and put in place the infrastructure in order to actually make sure folks don't have to choose between their health and their right to cast a ballot in November. And Mitch McConnell put out his offer, I use that term very loosely, on the coronavirus response package the other day, and it included exactly $0 for election funding. Zero. And guess what? It also included $0 for the United States Postal Service, which is critical to our ability to actually cast ballots by mail and make sure that we can get them delivered in the time that's needed. The House, on the other hand, passed $3.6 billion for election funding and preparedness, and because experts think we need between 2 to 4 billion, and $25 billion to help shore up the Postal Service because it's frankly going bankrupt. So look, for everybody who's watching, yes, please go to electjon.com/volunteer. We have to make sure that voters are being registered and that they're getting their ballots and that we're chasing them all the way through. The other thing is right now, we also need you to pick up the phones and call your senators. The next 2 weeks, we need to make them hear our voices and be as loud as possible. Because if we truly go into November with no additional funding for the states to be able to implement safe voting procedures, we're going to see chaos across the country, very similar to what we saw in many of these states in the primary. So that would be my other direct ask, is to please pick up the phone and call your senators today. And man, I really look forward to when that ask is about a call going to you, Jon, instead of a call going to David Perdue. But we have to be loud right now. Okay, next question. Let's talk about stocks. Georgia senators have really been at the forefront of the corruption that we've seen, where after getting private briefings about the incoming or oncoming pandemic, rather than immediately sounding the alarm and doing what was right to protect the American people, they went to make sure that their stock portfolio was okay, right? We saw them either sell off certain stocks or purchase certain stocks. What's going on in our political environment? And frankly, what can we do to make sure that our public elected officials are more concerned about the public rather than their own pocketbook?
Yeah, look, this is something that voters of all persuasions and all partisan affiliations in Georgia are incensed about, is the corruption of both of our sitting U.S. senators. It's shameful. I mean, my opponent, so as you know, there was a closed briefing for the Senate on January 24th on COVID-19. And literally that same day, my opponent was buying shares in a manufacturer of medical protective equipment. As the Senate was briefed in January and February, all the while, Senator Perdue was in public downplaying the threat, saying that the risk to our health was low, saying that the economic effects of the outbreak would be little. He bought shares in a manufacturer of vaccines, a developer of vaccines, Pfizer, which has actually now been awarded huge federal funds to continue developing a COVID-19 vaccine. He was dumping his casino shares. Kelly Loeffler, our other senator, not elected but appointed, and her husband, who owns the New York Stock Exchange, were dumping huge amounts of stock right after that briefing in late January. It's like this culture of impunity and arrogance that they think they can get away with it. And it's so blatant, and now just a complete refusal to take responsibility, denials across the board, almost flaunting it in front of the people that pay their salaries and voted them into office, that they're more concerned with adjusting their stock portfolios than preparing the country for the most deadly public health crisis in a century. It's absolutely shameful.
Yeah, and now they are also advocating cutting help directly to people, unemployment insurance going from $600 down to $200, but all the while cashing in on their private briefings to do things like go buy stock in Citrix, which makes software to make it easier to work from home. And this is why one of the things that I think we need to do to clean up corruption in the next Congress is to make sure that our members of Congress can't own individual stocks, because we need to make sure that we're restoring the faith and the trust that Americans can have that government is working for them, and that there's no appearance of impropriety at all. And right now, the disclosure is just not enough, and none of it is enforced, and they're not being held to account. And so the American people are coming last in those decisions.
Yeah, and look, here's the other aspect of it. Not only should members of Congress not be able to trade individual stocks, they should be required to put their stock portfolios into blind trust, period, in my opinion. And, that's something that Senator Johnny Isakson did when he represented the state of Georgia. And despite having been caught, like literally my opponent was trading stocks at 300% his normal tempo in February and March, while he was writing one of the largest economic bailouts in US history, and at the same time going out in public and echoing Donald Trump's assurances that COVID-19 would be fine and very few people had been infected and the risk was very low, trading stocks aggressively. And he still, to this day, refuses to put his stock portfolio in a blind trust. He came out a few weeks after all this broke. It was investigations by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and other news media. He came out a few weeks later and said, okay, I'm going to stop trading individual stocks. But he has refused to put his portfolio into a blind trust. And that's why it's like almost flaunting the corruption. It's what happens to some of these people when they, are in Washington, surrounded by people constantly praising them, hosting, as Senator Perdue does, these exclusive private island retreats in exchange for corporate PAC money, literally something that he does. Yeah. Private receptions at his home in exchange for corporate PAC checks, literally something that he does. So surrounded by these adoring lobbyists who want to cater to his every need and lavish his campaign with money, that he just shamelessly engages in this kind of conduct and basically tells his constituents that, if they have any complaints, too bad.
And he calls it the boardroom. Literally, these are the people who make the decisions about what direction a company should go. So I'm guessing he thinks that these are the people who should make the decisions about what direction our country's going in, rather than standing up for the workers, right? And who are—
That's right. I mean, for those who aren't briefed on it, that's exactly what he does. He calls it his boardroom, and he offers corporate lobbyists this sort of lavishly scripted, elegant-looking menu of access. And the lobbyists look at it and they say, for $7,500 corporate PAC check, I'll be entitled to 4 meetings a year and the senator's home and a retreat on a private island. It's straight up pay-to-play politics. And it's exactly why someone like Senator Perdue votes with polluters and not the public. He votes with pharma and not the public. And he votes with health insurance companies, even when it means throwing people off of their insurance or driving premiums up 20%.
Yeah. And this is kind of getting to my next question, which is, what can we actually do to clean up the corruption in Washington and get power back to the people? But you're exactly right. I mean, if you want to know why we can't lower prescription drug costs or pass common sense gun background checks to stop gun violence in our communities, or address climate change, or any of the other pressing problems that we have in our country right now, all you have to do is follow the special interest money. And the reason why what Jon is doing is so different is that he is refusing those contributions from those corporate PACs. And that is not something that is normally done by as you know, someone running for office is to say, no, I'm not going to take that money. But it does two things. Number one, it makes sure that he is being supported by people and therefore is connected more to his constituents. And number two, it makes sure that for all of you watching, you know who he's working for. That when he sits down at the table in Washington, D.C. and is talking about a bill, that it is always with your interest at heart, not some lavish corporate special interest donor who just spent a weekend at Georgia Sea Island retreat with them, right? So Jon, I'll let you take it, but so what do we do? I mean, this problem often does feel so big. How do we start to clean up the corruption in Washington?
Well, I mean, as you as the leader of End Citizens United are so focused rightly on getting that decision overturned, that's going to be a monumental effort that could require years to get done, given that it was a Supreme Court decision. We might need either a differently composed court or possibly a constitutional amendment, but there's still so much that we can do via the legislative process to clean up this system. And look, I'm not speaking for End Citizens United or Tiffany here. I'm just sharing my views, everyone. But I think we should ban corporate PACs altogether. I think that we should lower individual giving limits. I think that we should take revenues that are levied against corporate wrongdoing and use some of that to match small dollar contributions, so that ordinary people who are supporting candidates who have their best interests at heart have more of a voice in the system. So, I think there's so much that we have to do to increase transparency, to get the secret donors out of the system, to require organizations to disclose their donors. And look, here's something that I'll say openly that Senator Perdue will never say. He will never admit this in public. This problem, it infects the whole system. This is not just a partisan thing. It infects the whole system. And when you've got someone like Senator Perdue who raises money from these lobbyists and corporate PACs, well, how is he spending his time? What he's doing is he's sitting down at a desk and he's picking up the phone and he's calling lobbyists and he's asking them for money. And then those lobbyists are telling him on the same call what their policy priorities are. And everyone knows the game. Everyone knows this is a quid pro quo. And it's straight up corruption.
Absolutely. So I will say three things about that before the next question. One, my cat is climbing all over me. So when you see him in the picture, please just know I'm sorry. I realized I was trying to push him down. It was going to fail. So welcome to working from home. But you're exactly right. I mean, we at End Citizens United, our long-term goal is to overturn a Supreme Court case. And I don't know if that's just because we really enjoy really big challenges, or I wanted to make sure there was job security for a while. But more than anything, we know that we have to overturn that decision. But to do so, we have to change the makeup of the court or pass a constitutional amendment. And either one is going to take sending different leaders to the Senate, sending leaders like you who are prioritizing this issue, rather than folks like Senator Perdue who want to continue to allow the corruption to run amok, right? And while we are fighting that, and the exciting thing is like we said earlier, 78% of Republicans want to overturn Citizens United. We've seen 20 states pass ballot measures to overturn Citizens United, including states like Montana, right? Like not just blue states, but red states too. So we know we have the people with us. And the great news is there's so much we can do legislatively right now, today. And, the For the People Act, which was H.R. 1 in the House, is the largest anti-corruption bill and democracy reform bill that we've seen in over 50 years. And it's been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk since it passed the House on March 8th, 2019. And he's refused to even let it come up for a debate. And the things that you were talking about, so many of them are already wrapped into HR 1. And things like making sure that every dime spent in our elections is fully disclosed and transparent, right? So that we can stop the dark money, the secret money that we have no idea where it's even coming from infiltrating our system. Or the fact that it would expand the right to vote and access to voting, everything from automatic voter registration to making it to expanding early and in-person voting. It would institute a small dollar donor matching program so that folks were incentivized to go talk to small dollar donors instead of just big corporate donors. It would make sure that we were stopping foreign money from getting into our system, a national security issue that we have been faced with, especially over the last 3 election cycles. And it would end gerrymandering. So we had fair, independent districts where the voters were choosing their politicians instead of politicians choosing their voters. So there's so much that we can do today, and that passed the House. We just need the right people in the Senate in order to for it to pass the Senate. And I truly believe it's one of the things we could see done very early in 2021, and it would truly transform our system while we're still fighting that longer term fight of overturning Citizens United.
Yeah, I look forward to voting for its passage in early 2021. And we also got to look about, the importance of the Senate in confirming judges, because there's this very well-funded long-term project to pack the federal bench with judges who just expand the access that corporate lobbyists have to our political system. I mean, that's how we wound up with the Citizens United decision. It's this ideological and also corrupt effort to expand the capacity of secret and corporate donors to influence the political system. And so the Senate is the bulwark against that. That's where you got to have senators who will hold judicial appointees to a higher standard and really understand what their philosophy is on how our democracy is supposed to work. Is it really going to be a democracy where we have one person, one vote, and the individual is the most important unit? Or is it going to be a democracy where corporate power and corporate wealth overwhelm everything?
Yeah, and I think what most people are really surprised about is that they have no idea about the millions of dollars that is actually spent on these judicial nominees. So in the Gorsuch and Kavanaugh confirmations, for instance, there was $17 million. And we actually have no idea who funded that or where that money came from. But $17 million spent to help shore up those confirmations and those nominations.
You know what that makes me think of, Tiffany?
What's that?
The incredible return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
That a lot of these shadowy and corporate donors get. I mean, remember how Mitch McConnell was so open about how the reason that they wanted to load up the tax bill a couple of years ago with favors for the absolute wealthiest people and the largest corporate trade groups was to repay their donors?
Yeah.
He said out in the open, look, our donors expect this for us. I mean, the return on investment, in the hundreds of billions of dollars, when what they've done is spent a lot of money, but compared to that, not so much on lobbying and political donations. And it also makes a mockery of, the free market system, because what we wind up getting is these powerful cartels and corporate trade groups that are using their wealth to rig the tax code and rig rules of trade so that they continue to flourish, not because they're bringing the best products to market at the most competitive prices, like the market system's supposed to work, but because they've been able to purchase access to politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talked about it a little bit in my opening statement, but just taking Big Pharma as an example. So between lobbying and campaign contributions, they spent about $200 million, and they got a return on investment of $76 billion in tax breaks from that tax bill. That's a pretty good return on investment for them.
Not to mention so much of the basic research and the development of the drugs that they then patent and price gouge is done with taxpayer money at federal labs. I mean, we're seeing this right now with remdesivir, the drug that Gilead Sciences owns the rights to, which has been proven as an effective therapy for COVID-19 patients. There were tens of millions of taxpayer dollars sunk into the development of that drug at the NIH and other federal labs. That's the American people already ponying up to develop this potentially life-saving therapy. Then Gilead says, well, we now own this, and you, the American people, who are suffering in a pandemic are going to need to pay $3,200 a course for the only proven therapy for this deadly disease, even though you, the American taxpayer, have already paid to develop this drug. And they get away with it because they buy off politicians.
Which is, one more time, why we need you guys to go to electjon.com and help, because we can change it, right? Like, we actually can change this. And we saw what happened in the House when we were able to flip the House and send a whole class of reformers to the House after the 2018 election. And it started right off the bat with passing the largest anti-corruption package we've seen in 50 years. And then it went to everything from HR 3, which was lowering prescription drug costs, to background checks on guns, to an economy that could work for everyone, right? We have seen the agenda that can be laid out when we have leaders working for the people instead of the special interests. You have been an investigative journalist. You've seen firsthand how important it is to uncover corruption. What surprised you most about the actions of your opponent, incumbent Senator David Perdue?
Well, I think that there's this culture in politics right now of flaunting impunity, of just being out in the open with it, and basically showing your misdeeds and not caring because you believe you can get away with it. And when David Perdue creates like a secret club of donors called the boardroom, which literally means it's the people who call the shots, and then he sends these decorative menus of access out to lobbyists saying, would you like 2 meetings a year or 4 meetings a year? Well, the prices are here. Just so blatant and so shameless. And I think it reflects a real arrogance, and that he takes his seat for granted, and that he takes his ability to simply buy re-election for granted. But what he's not counting on is that grassroots donors are going to empower my campaign to expose his misdeeds, to make sure that every single voter knows how this guy works and how his machine operates. And that's why your small dollar support, everyone out there watching, $5, $10, $15 contributions, they add up. We actually outraised Senator Perdue in the second quarter of this year while refusing donations from corporate PACs, and with an average contribution of just $20. And that allows us to inform the public about how corrupt he is.
So we have some great questions that have been coming in from the audience while we've been doing this. So let's take a few of them. So Debbie from Eatonton asked, she said, I'm very concerned about voting during this COVID-19 pandemic. Me too, very much so. How can we assure a free and fair election?
Yeah, great question, Debbie. And I hope you and your family are healthy. And this is why we need to be calling our senators right now and demanding that they lean on Mitch McConnell to appropriate the resources that counties and states are going to need to hold elections that are free and fair in the middle of a pandemic. And it's why we need to demand that Secretary Raffensperger here in Georgia send absentee ballot request forms proactively to every voter. The fact that he's not already planning to do that, especially as the COVID-19 pandemic in Georgia is intensifying and becoming worse amidst some of the terrible decisions our governor has made, is really shocking. What I can also tell you, Debbie, is that my campaign will be working really, really hard on this. We will be in court. We will be doing what we can to help people access absentee ballot applications. We will be calling millions, literally millions of voters to inform them about how to vote early, how to get their mail ballot, how to track their mail ballot. And so, Debbie, if you want to help because you've got this concern, we need you on the team. We can't do this without volunteers. We can't reach out to all these voters without volunteers. So please go to electjon.com, electjon.com/volunteer. Sign up to send text messages and make phone calls, and you can help us directly protect the franchise in Georgia.
Yeah, and I would just double down on at Let America Vote. We understand that we need to guarantee a few things. So first, we need to make sure that everyone who wants to vote by mail and vote at home has the opportunity to do so, that we expand early in-person voting so that we're actually stretching out the amount of time that people have to go to vote. And that way there is less of a crowd on election day, and it keeps down the congregation of people. And then number three, we need to make sure that for folks who need or want to vote in person on election day, that they can do so safely. And that means everything from making sure that that we have enough poll workers, that those poll workers have protective equipment, that we have enough polling locations, that it can be done in a safe, clean, and sanitary way. And to do all of these things, we need to make sure that Congress appropriates the necessary funding to get to the states so that they can invest in that plan and that infrastructure today. And that really is truly why these next 2 weeks are so critically important. So you can also go to letamericavote.org and join us. Please call your senators. They need to put pressure on Mitch McConnell to put money for both the United States Postal Service and for election funding in the next coronavirus response bill that's currently being negotiated. Because right now, Mitch McConnell has suggested exactly $0 for both of those, and that's unacceptable. He thinks it's okay for himself or for members of this administration to vote by mail, but not for you. And I think that is truly because they don't want everyone's voices in this country to be heard. So we have to be even louder and even more organized. Okay, next question. Anne from Valdosta says, did I pronounce that right? Valdosta?
You got it.
All right. As an anti-corruption candidate, what's your very first priority?
Well, my first act in the Senate will be to co-sponsor the constitutional amendment that will result in a Citizens United decision being overturned. And I hope that within the first 3 days of my service in the Senate, I'll be able to vote to pass H.R. 1, which will have passed the House again in the new Congress, out of the Senate, and send that to President Biden's desk for signature so that we can reform this system. I mean, it's powerful legislation. It will do a lot of good. Thanks to End Citizens United for your work drawing attention to it and building support for it. And I think we also need to get serious about the revolving door in Washington. I think this is one of the greatest ironies of Donald Trump's presidency, who pledged to come in and drain the swamp, that the Secretary of Defense is a former lobbyist for Raytheon, a major defense contractor. The head of the EPA is a former lobbyist for the coal industry, and on and on and on. There are so many senior federal appointees who have conflicts of interest, who came directly from industries that are directly impacted by the decisions they'll make in government. You can rest assured that when Donald Trump loses, they're going to go scurrying right back to well-paid positions in those industries. And they're making decisions right now based upon that expectation. It's shameful the way people just go back and forth between federal service and lobbying. And, you know, there's something, frankly, that happens no matter who's in power, but it's particularly egregious in the Trump administration.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think one of the things that we've seen too is this massive increase in the number of members of Congress who go on to become lobbyists after their service. And, you know, not to go way back, but in 1974, around the Watergate babies time, it was only 3% of members of Congress who went on to become lobbyists. And today that's risen to 65% of members of Congress who either retire or lose their reelection who go on to become lobbyists. And
let's ban it.
Exactly. We have to stop that revolving door, because if you're constantly thinking about what your next step is going to be in the private sector, then you're not thinking about what's best for the public today.
And I don't think, look, this is just my opinion. Again, I'm saying that to make clear, I don't necessarily speak for Tiffany or presume we haven't, pre-planned all this in advance. I don't think senators should be able to get paid to make speeches while they're senators. I mean, it's a known underhanded way of buying influence with elected officials. We need public officials who are not in this for self-enrichment. We need public officials who are not making the first call to their broker when they learn that there is an impending pandemic, rather than holding a press conference and warning the public about what's coming.
That's exactly right. And we didn't plan any of this, but I could not agree more. That's exactly what we need. We have to do whatever we can to both assure the public that our public officials are working for the public and to make sure that our public officials are actually working for the public. Okay, so Joseph from Dawsonville asks, can you explain how the Citizens United ruling affected campaign contributions? That's fun. I'm excited about that one. But Jon, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm going to give the 50,000-foot view and let Tiffany fill in the blanks since it's literally her subject matter expertise. But the Citizens United decision treats corporate speech as the same as personal speech, and it allows, by its interpretation of the Constitution, unlimited and secret spending on political communications. Tiffany, yep. You want to fill in the gaps?
Absolutely. That is essentially what it does. It basically really did say corporations are people and money equals speech. And so therefore it allowed them to spend unlimited and often undisclosed amounts of money to influence our federal elections. But let's talk about what it did. Let's talk about how it's changed our system in just 10 years. So prior to the Citizens United ruling, the last election cycle prior to it in 2008, there was $143 million of outside spending in our elections. That's a lot of money. And that was a big presidential election. Remember, it was Obama's first presidential run. It was like the most expensive campaigns we had ever seen. $143 million of outside spending. In 2016 and again in 2018, that number ballooned to $1.4 billion of outside spending. We've seen a 900% increase in outside spending in just, 4 short election cycles? Just 8 years, now 10 years. And those are all numbers. They don't necessarily mean a ton, but what it means for you right there in Georgia is that it means that instead of Jon getting to just define himself, introduce himself to the voters, say, here's who I am, here's what my priorities are, here's what I'm going to go to Washington, D.C. and fight for. It is these outside special interests with often innocuous names like Americans Love Puppies, who come in and spend tons of money trying to define who he is and telling outright blatant lies, right? And so what it has been is that rather than a campaign controlling a message that these outside special interest groups control about 75% of the communications and campaigns. That then does a whole host of things to our policy. People are far more scared now about the threat of outside spending coming into their race. A good place where we see this is climate change. Prior to Citizens United, there were 14 instances of Senate Republicans joining with Democrats to try to solve the issue of climate change and what we're seeing. Since the Citizens United ruling, there have been 0. That's not because they suddenly had to change a heart about whether or not this issue is important. They had to change a heart about whether or not the oil and gas industry were going to come in and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat them in their next election. So now it is not only the actual money being spent, it is the threat of that money being spent that is totally breaking down all of our policy priorities. I feel like I could keep going, but I feel like that gives a pretty good sense of what it's done.
Yeah, and you'll see, Joseph, that this spending sometimes comes in not even during election time, but while there's an ongoing legislative debate or while a member of Congress is being lobbied. Suddenly ads will pop up that are sort of dressed up as issue advocacy that are meant to put pressure on that member of Congress because it's the threat of an attack ad that's meant to induce them to do whatever the interest group wants them to do. Yeah,
absolutely. So I don't know if you can believe this. I can't. But believe it or not, we are coming to the end of our time together. We have already talked for almost an hour. And I feel like the next time, we were joking about this right before we went live, but next time we should do a whole marathon because I feel like you and I keep talking about this for hours. But I want to kick it back to you to give an opportunity to give closing remarks before we have to sign off for today.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany, for being part of this and for your support. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in at home, on your phones, wherever you are. First and foremost, best wishes and love to everybody out there. I know this is a difficult time. I know many people are ill. Many people have family members who are ill. Many families are worried about making rent payments or making those mortgage payments. A lot of folks are getting laid off. A lot of small business owners are worried about making payroll. These are really, really tough times. And so first and foremost, I want y'all to know that, my heart goes out to you, and that I do believe that there's hope and a brighter future ahead. We're going to be able to elect competent people who, for example, trust and follow public health advice during a pandemic. We're going to be able to elect people who are committed to reforming our broken campaign finance system and getting dark money out of politics. We're going to be able to elect people who will stand up to health insurance and drug companies to stop price gouging, stand up to polluters who are poisoning our air and poisoning our water. All of that is within our grasp. We just have to be focused on winning these elections in November. And I think truly the Republic is on the line. I don't think that we can have any doubt. I don't think there is any doubt about the consequences of failure here. Failure is not an option. So we need to buckle down. And while we are remaining committed, of course, to supporting one another and our families and our communities, also engaging in the civic space and in democracy to make change, because we need change so badly. So I want to invite everyone again to become part of that. If you're wondering how you can get involved and how you can do it in a way that's safe and that protects your health, there's so much that you can do from home. Making phone calls, sending text messages. You can get all that information at my campaign website, electjon.com/volunteer. Tiffany, thank you again so much for your time and your efforts. You are, truly a warrior in the belly of the beast in Washington, fighting a broken and corrupt system from within. And I know that takes courage and it takes grit, and there are ups and downs, but you're on the right side of history, and together we're going to prevail.
Thank you so much, Jon. It was really such an honor and a privilege to be able to join you today for this conversation. And to everyone who is able to join us, thank you for taking the time today. And I want to reiterate what Jon said, which is just that I hope you are well. I hope you are safe. And I know these are difficult times, but thank you for taking the time during this to join us. We're 97 days out from the election, and I feel like every election cycle we hear that this is the most important election of our lifetime, but that has definitely never been more true than it is today. And we're 97 days out from creating a different future for our country, a better future, one where our leaders will make decisions in the public interest and not in their own best interest. And to do that, we have to elect leaders like Jon Ossoff. So please go to electjon.com, give what you can, volunteer, because the other side is hoping that what you will do is that you will stay home, or you won't find that extra hour to volunteer, or you won't find that extra $5 or $10, because the only way they win is if we don't show up as loud and as organized as we can. So let's show up together. Let's elect Jon Ossoff to the Senate. And thank you so very much for joining us today.